Edward Harrington, an English lord, hires the new maid, Sophia Hawthorne, to pretend to be his fiancée at his family's Christmas party in the countryside of Yorkshire. But no one expected that. What could happen when such an unlikely secret is brought to the most magical night of the year? Before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching the video from. And don't forget to subscribe. In the heart of winter, the Yorkshire countryside lay blanketed in a pristine layer of snow, transforming the landscape into a serene wonderland. The biting chill of December air seeped through the walls of Harrington Manor, a grand estate that stood proudly against the backdrop of the white-laden hills. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but tranquil. Edward Harrington, the sole heir to the Harrington title, sat in his study, his brow furrowed in deep contemplation. The flickering fire cast shadows on the ornate wood paneling, dancing as if mocking the turmoil within him. The weight of family expectations pressed heavily on Edward's shoulders. He was no stranger to the traditions that bound him, nor to the whispers of society that dictated he should be engaged by now. Each Christmas gathering was a reminder of his solitary status, a fact that gnawed at him like an insistent specter. His mother, Lady Harrington, had made it abundantly clear that this year's gathering would not be an exception. She had already begun her relentless inquiries into potential brides, her hopes pinned on the idea of seeing her son settled, preferably with someone of suitable birth and breeding. As he gazed into the fire, Edward felt the suffocating grip of duty. The vast estate, a symbol of his family's legacy, felt more like a gilded cage than a home. He longed for freedom, for the chance to carve out his own path, but the chains of tradition held him firmly in place. The thought of marrying someone he did not love, merely to fulfill an obligation, sent a shiver through him that was not entirely due to the cold. In an impulsive moment of rebellion against the confines of his life, Edward considered an unusual solution: hiring a temporary fiancée. The idea seemed ludicrous at first, yet the more he mulled it over, the more appealing it became. With a fabricated engagement, he could appease his mother and the prying eyes of society without sacrificing his own desires. The notion of finding someone to play the part, even if only for a short while, filled him with a sense of hope he had not felt in years. On the following day, Edward made his way into the nearby village, a quaint place where the cobblestone streets wound through charming shops and bustling market stalls. It was a place he had often visited as a child, filled with laughter, warmth, and the scent of baked goods wafting through the air. But today, his mind was preoccupied with thoughts of his plan. He wandered through the market, observing the villagers go about their business, their faces alight with the spirit of the season. Amongst the crowd, he spotted her, a young maid named Sophia Hawthorne. She was standing by a stall filled with fresh produce, her hands deftly selecting ripe apples while her hair, a cascade of chestnut waves, caught the light. Edward had seen her before, though he had never spoken to her. She seemed out of place in her humble attire, her face painted with a determination that intrigued him. She was not a lady of society, yet there was something about her that sparked an idea in his mind. With a deep breath, Edward approached her, his heart racing as he prepared to lay out his unconventional proposition. He watched her for a moment, captivated by the way she interacted with the vendors, her laughter ringing like a bell as she haggled for the best prices. There was an authenticity to her that he found refreshing, a stark contrast to the carefully curated personas of the women his mother favored. As he drew closer, he noticed the way her eyes lit up when she found the perfect apple, and for a fleeting moment, he felt a pang of longing for the simplicity of her life. He had everything: wealth, status, and a title, but the emptiness that accompanied his privilege was suffocating. Here was someone who, despite her modest circumstances, seemed to embody a kind of joy he could only dream of. Gathering his resolve, Edward introduced himself, the words tumbling out in a rush. He explained the unusual nature of his request, his voice steady despite the absurdity of the situation. Sophia listened intently, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. He could see the wheels turning in her mind, weighing the gravity of his proposal against the reality of her life. Sophia Hawthorne was, by all accounts, a diligent maid, working tirelessly to support herself and her younger siblings after the untimely death of their father. Life had not been kind to her, and each day was a struggle to make ends meet. Yet, despite the hardships, she harbored dreams of a brighter future, of stepping beyond the boundaries of her current existence. The thought of adventure, of playing a role in a world so starkly different from her own, ignited a flicker of excitement within her. As Edward outlined the details of the charade, Sophia's initial hesitation began to wane. The prospect of stepping into a world of privilege, even if only for a short while, was tantalizing. She pictured herself in elegant gowns, surrounded by opulence, mingling with people who danced through life with ease and grace. It was a world she had only glimpsed from afar, and the allure was undeniable. Yet, beneath the excitement lay a layer of apprehension. Could she truly pull off such a deception? What if she failed to convince Edward's family of her fabricated status? The thought of being exposed was terrifying, yet the promise of a better life, even temporarily, was seductive. She found herself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, the dreamer within her battling against the cautious realist. In that fleeting moment, Edward sensed her struggle and felt an unexpected connection form between them. He could see the fire in her eyes, the spark of ambition intertwined with uncertainty. He admired her resilience and wondered if, perhaps, they were not so different after all. Both were navigating the treacherous waters of expectation and desire, each yearning for something more. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sophia made her decision. The thrill of the unknown and the chance to escape her current circumstances outweighed her fears. If she could help Edward, perhaps she would find a way to help herself as well. With a nod, she accepted his proposal, unaware of the emotional entanglements that lay ahead. As they stood there in the bustling market, surrounded by the sights and sounds of the village, Edward felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had taken a leap of faith, and in doing so, had forged a connection with someone who, despite their differences, understood the weight of expectation and the yearning for something more. Together, they would embark on a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves, each other, and the nature of love itself. As the winter sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow-dusted streets, Edward and Sophia walked side by side, their minds racing with the possibilities of their shared future. Little did they know that the charade they were about to undertake would unravel hidden truths and unexpected feelings, binding them together in ways they could never have anticipated. As Edward and Sophia approached the Harrington estate, the grandiosity of the manor loomed before them, a breathtaking display of opulence nestled amidst the Yorkshire countryside. The sprawling grounds were adorned with a delicate dusting of snow, the late afternoon sun casting a golden hue over the scene. Towering trees surrounded the estate, their branches heavy with the weight of winter, while the meticulously maintained gardens lay dormant beneath the frost. The sight was both enchanting and overwhelming for Sophia, who had spent her life in far more modest surroundings. Stepping from the carriage, Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The castle-like structure of the Harrington home was a world apart from her reality. As she ascended the stone steps, her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. What had begun as a simple arrangement, one that promised a temporary escape from her past, was now transforming into something far more complex. She hesitated for a moment, taking in the intricate carvings on the door and the grandeur of the entryway before Edward gently ushered her inside. The hall was expansive, with high ceilings and walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors staring down at them. The air was filled with the scent of pine and spices, a harbinger of the festive season. As they entered, a flurry of activity greeted them. Servants scurried about, preparing for the imminent arrival of family members. The atmosphere pulsated with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Sophia could feel the weight of the Harrington legacy pressing down upon her, and she instinctively straightened her shoulders, reminding herself of the role she was meant to play. Almost immediately, they were met by Edward's mother, Lady Margaret Harrington. Her presence was commanding, and Sophia felt a chill run down her spine as she was scrutinized under the sharp gaze of the matriarch. With a smile that barely reached her eyes, Lady Margaret enveloped Sophia in a perfunctory embrace, her grip firm and assessing. Sophia sensed the unspoken questions swirling in the air. Who was this woman who had been thrust into their midst, and why had Edward chosen her? As introductions flowed, Sophia found herself standing before a small gathering of Edward's relatives. Each one looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, their expressions revealing an unspoken judgment. There was Edward's younger sister, Clara, who appeared intrigued and hopeful, and their cousin, Thomas, who regarded her with barely concealed disdain. Sophia fought to maintain her composure, offering polite smiles and nods, while internally wrestling with the mounting pressure to convince them of her authenticity as Edward's fiancée. As the evening wore on, Edward and Sophia began to slip into their roles more comfortably. In the kitchen, they worked side by side, helping the staff prepare for the Christmas feast. The atmosphere was filled with laughter and the aroma of freshly baked goods, a stark contrast to the formalities of the dining room. Here, away from the judgmental eyes of the family, Sophia felt a sense of ease returning. She and Edward exchanged glances, sharing moments of unspoken understanding, laughter bubbling up as they navigated the chaos of the kitchen. In these shared moments, the walls that had initially separated them began to crumble. Edward's laughter was infectious, and Sophia found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't anticipated. They swapped stories about their childhoods, the laughter punctuated by flour-dusted hands and the occasional mishap with the cooking pots. As they worked, the tension that had initially surrounded them began to dissolve, replaced by a burgeoning camaraderie. It was a refreshing reprieve from the weight of their charade, a glimpse into a connection that felt increasingly genuine. But such moments were fleeting. The looming specter of dinner with the family hung over them like a gathering storm. As evening descended, the Harringtons gathered around the long, elegantly set table, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on their faces. The clattering of cutlery and the murmur of conversation filled the air, creating a cacophony that only heightened Sophia's anxiety. She sat beside Edward, her heart racing as she prepared herself for the scrutiny that would inevitably follow. Midway through the meal, Lady Margaret leaned forward, her gaze piercing as she addressed Edward directly. It was a simple question, yet it carried the weight of their entire charade. "Edward, dear, tell us more about your engagement. How did you and Miss Hawthorne come to know each other?" The silence that followed was deafening, every eye in the room fixated on them, awaiting an answer. Sophia's stomach twisted with apprehension. She glanced at Edward, who met her gaze with a reassuring nod, though she could see the tension in his jaw. They had not prepared for this moment, and the pressure to create a convincing backstory loomed large. It was a test of their resolve, a moment that would either solidify their deception or expose the truth that lay beneath. With a deep breath, Edward began to weave a tale, drawing upon fragments of their reality. His chance encounter with Sophia at the market, the mutual understanding that had sparked between them. As he spoke, Sophia could feel the warmth of his words wrapping around her, creating an illusion of authenticity that almost felt real. They shared a story of serendipity, of a chance meeting that had blossomed into a whirlwind romance, all while navigating the probing questions of family members who were eager for every detail. Sophia listened intently, matching his energy as they created a tapestry of lies that shimmered with the threads of truth. She could see the skepticism in some of their relatives' eyes, particularly in Thomas, whose brows furrowed with doubt. Yet, as they navigated through the questions and the laughter, a bond began to form between Edward and Sophia that transcended mere pretense. They became allies in this charade, their shared laughter and subtle glances knitting together a connection that felt increasingly genuine. As the dinner wore on, the conversation shifted to holiday traditions, and Sophia found herself swept away by the stories of the Harrington family. She listened with rapt attention, absorbing the tales of past Christmases filled with joy and laughter, the traditions that had shaped their lives. Each story was a glimpse into a world she had only dreamed of, a world of privilege, love, and warmth. It was a stark contrast to her own memories, filled with the struggles of survival and the weight of expectations. The night drew to a close, and as the guests began to disperse, Sophia felt a sense of relief wash over her. The evening had been a whirlwind of emotions, but in the midst of the chaos, she had forged a connection with Edward that she had not expected. They shared a moment alone in the dimly lit hallway, the remnants of the evening still echoing in their minds. The laughter and chatter of the family faded into the background as they stood in the quiet, the weight of their deception hanging between them like a fragile thread. In that moment, Sophia realized that her feelings for Edward were shifting. The lines between pretense and reality were blurring, and she found herself drawn to him in a way that transcended their arrangement. As she looked into his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own uncertainty, a shared understanding of the fragile nature of their situation. The connection they had forged was undeniable, and as they stood there, the path ahead felt uncertain yet filled with possibilities. Sophia stood in the grand study of the Harrington estate, her fingers brushing against the polished wood of the desk. The room was an eclectic mix of opulence and history, with leather-bound books lining the shelves and portraits of stern-faced ancestors watching over her. A large window overlooked the snowy grounds, the pale winter sun casting a muted glow across the room. It all felt surreal, a world so far removed from her own. As she perused the various trinkets and documents strewn across the desk, her gaze fell upon an ornate box, intricately carved with the Harrington family crest. Curiosity piqued, she lifted the lid, revealing a collection of delicate jewelry nestled within, glinting softly in the dim light. Among the jewels, a brooch caught her eye. It was a stunning piece, resembling a blooming flower with intricate petals made of silver and adorned with tiny sapphires that seemed to twinkle like stars. Sophia felt a strange pull toward it, as if it whispered secrets of the family's history. As she held it delicately between her fingers, she imagined the stories it could tell, of past gatherings, of loves lost and found, of the expectations that clung to each generation like a heavy cloak. In that moment, she understood that this heirloom was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of the weight Edward carried, a tangible representation of the legacy he felt compelled to uphold. He had spoken of his lineage with a mix of pride and trepidation, burdened by the expectations that loomed over him like storm clouds. This discovery deepened her empathy for him, revealing the vulnerabilities that lay beneath his composed exterior. She felt a connection to his struggle, a shared understanding of the pressures that shaped their lives in such different ways. As she placed the brooch back in its resting place, Sophia's heart raced with the realization that their charade was evolving into something more complex. Edward was not merely a lord with an obligation. He was a man wrestling with his identity, caught between duty and desire. The line between pretense and reality blurred, and she found herself contemplating the depth of their burgeoning relationship. Later that evening, the atmosphere in the estate shifted as the family gathered for a festive celebration. Laughter echoed through the halls, mingling with the sweet scent of roasted meats and spiced mulled wine. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an enchanting ambience that made Sophia's heart swell with an unexpected joy. She stood beside Edward, her hand resting lightly on his arm, feeling the warmth radiate from him. They exchanged glances filled with unspoken words, a quiet understanding passing between them as they navigated the whirlwind of family interactions. As the night unfolded, the music began to play, a lively tune that beckoned the guests to the dance floor. Sophia felt a rush of excitement mingled with trepidation. Dancing had always been a dream of hers, a fantasy that felt just out of reach. But here, in this moment, the reality of stepping into Edward's world enveloped her. He offered her his hand, and as she accepted, an electric charge coursed through her, igniting a spark of something she had not anticipated. They moved to the center of the room, surrounded by the laughter and chatter of Edward's family. As they began to sway to the rhythm, Sophia felt the world around them fade away. The music became a backdrop to their shared experience, the notes wrapping around them like a warm embrace. Edward's gaze was soft, his expression a mixture of tenderness and mischief. He led her effortlessly, guiding her through the steps, his presence anchoring her in a whirlwind of emotions. With each turn and dip, Sophia found herself lost in the moment, the boundaries of their roles dissolving into the air. She caught glimpses of Edward's laughter, the way his eyes sparkled with joy, and for a fleeting instant, the weight of their pretense felt like a distant memory. She felt seen, cherished, and most importantly, real. The dance was more than just a performance. It was a revelation, a shared secret binding them closer than either of them anticipated. Yet, as the evening wore on, the spell was abruptly broken by the arrival of Charles, Edward's childhood friend. He strode into the room with an air of confidence, his presence commanding attention. The laughter faded into murmurs as he approached, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Sophia. There was an intensity about him that sent a shiver down her spine. It was as if he could see through the facade they had created. Sophia felt a shift in the atmosphere, the joyous ambience now tinged with an undercurrent of tension. Charles's eyes flicked between Edward and Sophia, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion flickering across his features. There was something in the way he regarded her that made her uneasy, as if he were searching for any sign of deceit. She could sense the strain in Edward's posture, the way his shoulders tightened as he braced himself for the inevitable confrontation. As the evening continued, Charles's presence loomed like a dark cloud, overshadowing the warmth that had blossomed between Sophia and Edward. The interplay of their interactions became charged, with Charles's probing glances and pointed questions creating an unspoken tension. Sophia felt the weight of his scrutiny, her heart racing as she tried to navigate the delicate balance of their charade. Edward, caught in the middle, struggled to maintain his composure. His laughter felt strained, his smiles forced as he attempted to deflect Charles's inquiries. The easy camaraderie they had shared began to fray, the connection Sophia had felt moments before now tinged with uncertainty. She could see the flicker of confusion in Edward's eyes, a reflection of his internal conflict as he grappled with his loyalty to his friend and the burgeoning feelings he had for her. In that moment, Sophia realized how fragile their constructed reality was. The delicate strands that had woven them together were now threatened by the arrival of an outsider, someone who knew Edward's past and held the key to his insecurities. As Charles continued to engage Edward in light-hearted banter, Sophia found herself retreating into her thoughts, questioning the foundations of their relationship. Was their connection strong enough to withstand the scrutiny of those who knew them best? The evening drew to a close, but the tension remained thick in the air. Sophia retreated to her quarters, her mind racing with unanswered questions. She gazed out the window, the snowflakes swirling outside mirroring the turmoil in her heart. The world felt both magical and isolating, a paradox that left her yearning for clarity. She had stepped into Edward's world with excitement, but now, with Charles's presence looming over them, uncertainty clouded her thoughts. As she lay in bed that night, Sophia's dreams were filled with fragments of their dance, the warmth of Edward's hand on hers, the thrill of being seen and cherished. Yet, the shadow of Charles hung over her, a reminder of the complexities that lay ahead. She knew that the coming days would test their connection, forcing them to confront not only their feelings for each other, but also the truths they had yet to face. The path forward was shrouded in ambiguity, but one thing was certain. Sophia felt a desire to fight for what she had begun to build with Edward, even if it meant confronting the obstacles that stood in their way. The air within the Harrington estate buzzed with the frenetic energy of the holiday season. A cacophony of laughter, tinkling glasses, and the soft strains of festive music drifting through the grand halls. Outside, snow blanketed the Yorkshire countryside, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. Inside, however, the atmosphere was charged with tension, a palpable undercurrent that threatened to disrupt the carefully constructed facade of joy. Sophia Hawthorne moved through the bustling kitchen, her hands deftly arranging a tray of freshly baked gingerbread men. The sweet, spicy aroma enveloped her, a comforting reminder of simpler times. Yet, her heart was heavy, shadowed by the confrontation she had just endured with Charles, Edward Harrington's childhood friend. His accusation felt like a cold knife, sharp and piercing, as he had confronted her in a manner that left no room for doubt about his distrust. Manipulating Edward for personal gain, he had said, his voice dripping with disdain. Sophia had felt her cheeks flush, the warmth of embarrassment mingling with the sting of his words. She remembered the way he had looked at her, eyes narrowed, jaw set, with the conviction of someone who had already made up his mind about her character. The injustice of it all had ignited a fire within her, a fierce need to prove not only her sincerity but also her worthiness of Edward's affection. As the kitchen bustled around her, Sophia focused on the task at hand, determined to channel her frustration into something productive. She poured her heart into decorating the cookies, each icing swirl and sprinkle an expression of her earnest spirit. She thought of the children in the neighborhood, their innocent faces lighting up at the sight of the colorful treats. It was a small gesture, but it was one she could control in a world that seemed to spin out of her grasp. Meanwhile, Edward Harrington stood just outside the kitchen, his brow furrowed with concern as he listened to the muffled sounds of laughter and celebration. He had overheard the confrontation and felt a tumult of emotions swirling within him. On one hand, there was his loyalty to Charles, a friend who had been with him through thick and thin. On the other hand, there was Sophia, whose presence had brought an unexpected warmth to his heart, a feeling he had almost forgotten in the shadow of his family's expectations. He had seen the hurt flash across her face when Charles had accused her, and it had torn at something deep within him. Edward stepped back into the hallway, his mind racing. He could no longer ignore the truth that had been slowly revealing itself to him. The charade that had started as a mere convenience had evolved into something much deeper. He admired Sophia's spirit, her kindness, and the way she seemed to genuinely care for those around her. Her laughter had become a melody he looked forward to, a soothing balm to his often tumultuous emotions. Even as he stood on the precipice of his own confusion, he felt an undeniable pull towards her, a magnetic force that drew him closer. Enough, he whispered to himself, shaking his head as if to clear his thoughts. He needed to confront this situation, to decide where his loyalties truly lay. Yet, the thought of standing up to Charles filled him with a sense of dread. He had always been the peacemaker, the one who kept harmony within the group. But now, faced with the possibility of losing Sophia, he felt an urgency that was impossible to ignore. As evening fell, the estate transformed into a picturesque setting for a Christmas celebration. The grand dining hall sparkled with decorations, twinkling lights draped over every surface, the scent of pine from the massive tree standing proudly in the corner, adorned with glimmering ornaments. Sophia, having finished the gingerbread men, was called to help with the final preparations for the dinner, her heart racing with anticipation. The warmth of the room and the vibrant colors of the decorations seemed to contrast sharply with the turmoil brewing within her. She glanced up as Edward entered the room, his presence commanding yet somehow vulnerable. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting moment, Sophia felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this evening would allow her to mend the rift caused by Charles's accusations. She wanted to show Edward who she truly was, to peel back the layers of pretense and reveal the sincerity of her heart. Later, as the guests gathered around the table, Sophia found herself seated near Edward, the warmth of his presence a comforting balm against her earlier distress. The conversation flowed easily among the family members, laughter intermingling with the clinking of glasses and the rich aromas of the feast. Yet, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider, a mere player in a grand performance. She glanced at Edward, who was engaged in conversation with his mother, his expression attentive and dutiful. It was a side of him she admired, but also one that made her heart ache with longing. As the evening progressed, Sophia excused herself to refresh her drink, needing a moment to gather her thoughts. She stepped out onto the terrace, the cold air hitting her like a refreshing wave. The moonlight illuminated the snow-covered garden, casting a serene glow over the landscape. She took a deep breath, feeling the chill seep into her bones, grounding her in the moment. It was then that Edward joined her, stepping outside with a hesitant grace. He paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the scene before turning to Sophia, his expression unreadable. The tension hung between them like a taut string, ready to snap at any moment. Edward shifted his weight, the silence stretching as they both gathered their thoughts. He wanted to reach out to her, to assure her that he believed in her, but the words felt trapped within him, suffocated by the weight of his insecurities. "Why do you care so much?" Sophia finally asked, her voice a whisper against the night's stillness. "Why do you let Charles get to you?" Edward looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. The sincerity in her eyes cut through the haze of uncertainty that had clouded his mind. He wanted to tell her everything, the truth of his feelings, the fear of losing her, and his struggle to balance friendship with the burgeoning affection he felt. But instead, he merely shook his head, the words eluding him. Sophia's heart sank, and she turned her gaze back to the garden, the beauty of the winter landscape contrasting sharply with the turmoil inside her. She felt a sense of defeat wash over her, the weight of Charles's accusations bearing down on her spirit. But then, as if sensing her despair, Edward stepped closer, the warmth of his body radiating against the chill of the night air. In that moment, the world around them faded away. The laughter from the dining room became a distant echo. The swirling snowflakes danced like tiny stars falling from the heavens, and all that remained was the two of them, standing on the precipice of something profound. Edward reached out, almost hesitantly, brushing his fingers against her arm, a tentative gesture that spoke volumes. Sophia turned to him, her breath catching in her throat as their eyes locked once more. The connection between them was undeniable, a thread woven from their shared experiences and unspoken desires. In that quiet moment, both understood that they were not just playing roles in a charade. They were two souls searching for a place to belong, yearning for a connection that transcended the boundaries they had set for themselves. As the distant sound of children's laughter floated through the air, Sophia felt a spark of inspiration. She thought of her earlier plan to spread joy to the neighborhood children, to bring them a glimpse of the magic of Christmas. Perhaps this was her chance to show Edward, and everyone else, who she truly was. With newfound determination, she turned to Edward, her heart racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. Inside the estate, the clamor of the festivities continued, but Sophia's focus shifted. She would not be defined by Charles's doubts or her status as a maid. She would craft a moment that would resonate with everyone, a gesture that would embody the spirit of Christmas and showcase her true self. With that resolve, she invited Edward back inside, her eyes alight with purpose. As they re-entered the warmth of the dining room, Sophia felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The laughter and joy enveloped her, and she was determined to be part of this tapestry of life, to weave her own thread into the fabric of the Harrington family. She began to share her idea with Edward, her voice filled with enthusiasm, her heart brimming with hope. Together, they could create something beautiful, something that would unite everyone in the spirit of the season. In that moment, amidst the vibrant chaos of the Harrington estate, a new chapter began to unfold, filled with promise and the potential for connection that neither Sophia nor Edward had anticipated. As the grand facade of Harrington Manor stood proud against the backdrop of the Yorkshire countryside, a palpable tension wrapped itself around the estate, merging with the icy winds that whipped through the trees. Christmas Eve was upon them, and while the manor was decorated with garlands and twinkling lights, inside, uncertainty loomed. Edward Harrington paced the dimly lit drawing room, his heart racing in rhythm with the storm brewing outside. He had planned to express his feelings for Sophia Hawthorne, the maid who had so unexpectedly stepped into the role of his fiancée. Yet now, as the wind howled and snow began to blanket the ground, he found himself hesitating, caught in the web of familial expectations and the reality of what his heart truly desired. The flickering flames in the fireplace cast a warm glow, but Edward felt anything but warm. He wrestled with the weight of his lineage, the unspoken rules of his aristocratic family that dictated who he should love and how he should conduct himself. His mother's disapproving gaze seemed to haunt him, a constant reminder of the duties that lay before him. Edward was torn, caught between the societal norms that had governed his life and the burgeoning feelings he had nurtured for Sophia. She had brought laughter into his world, a breath of fresh air amidst the oppressive expectations, and yet he feared the consequences of his open affection. Meanwhile, Sophia found herself in a whirlwind of emotions. The initial thrill of stepping into the Harrington family's world had transformed into a complex tapestry of feelings woven with hope and uncertainty. She had felt a connection with Edward that transcended the facade of their arrangement, yet the looming specter of his past engagement shadowed her heart. The revelation of Edward's broken engagement weighed heavily on her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was merely a placeholder in a story that had already been written. As night fell and the snowstorm intensified, the atmosphere in the manor grew increasingly charged. Family members gathered in the sprawling drawing room, their laughter echoing off the ornate walls, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within Edward. The tension escalated when Charles, Edward's childhood friend, strode into the room, his demeanor icy. He had always held a special place in Edward's heart, yet the arrival of Sophia had introduced a crack in their friendship that he could not ignore. Charles wore his feelings like armor, defensive and skeptical, casting doubt on Sophia's intentions and Edward's decisions. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and the power flickered momentarily, sending a wave of unease through the gathering. The storm outside became a mirror to the storm brewing within the walls of Harrington Manor. As the family settled down for what was meant to be a joyous evening, the atmosphere shifted, secrets simmering just beneath the surface. Laughter turned to whispers as Charles confronted Edward, accusations intermingling with the sound of falling snow. Edward felt the weight of his friend's words, the accusation that Sophia was merely a charlatan, a manipulator seeking to climb the social ladder at his expense. The tension reached a boiling point when Charles revealed a truth that shattered the fragile peace they had maintained. Edward's past engagement, one that had ended abruptly and left scars on his heart, was laid bare for all to hear. The room fell silent, eyes darting between Edward and Charles, the implications of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. Sophia, caught in the crossfire, felt her heart sink as the warmth of the fire turned to ice within her. She had stepped into this world hoping for a chance at a different life, but now, the very foundation of her dreams felt threatened. Edward's expression shifted, a storm of emotions playing across his features. He felt exposed, vulnerable under the weight of his friend's words. The memories of his past engagement, the pain of that loss, and the pressure to conform to his family's expectations clawed at him. He had thought that adopting this charade with Sophia would offer him a reprieve from those expectations, a chance to carve out his own narrative, but now, it seemed as if the ghosts of his past were haunting him anew. He glanced at Sophia, her face a mix of confusion and hurt, and in that moment, he realized how deeply he had come to care for her. Amidst the chaos, Sophia sought solace in the kitchen, where the warmth of the stove offered a brief respite from the emotional turmoil. The aroma of spices and baked goods hung in the air, a stark contrast to the icy reality outside. As she stood there, stirring a pot of mulled wine, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Edward's younger sister, Clara, whose keen eyes seemed to see right through the pretense. Clara spoke softly, her voice a gentle balm against Sophia's frayed nerves. She shared tales of their family's history, of love lost and found, of the complexities that came with being part of the Harrington lineage. Clara's words sparked a flicker of hope within Sophia, but the shadows of doubt loomed large. The revelation of Edward's past engagement, coupled with Charles's accusations, had planted seeds of insecurity in her heart. Was she merely a stand-in for someone who had once held his affections? The thought gnawed at her, threatening to unravel the bond they had begun to forge. She understood the stakes were high, and the reality of their situation pressed down on her like the weight of the snow falling outside. As the night wore on, the storm intensified, and the family was trapped within the walls of Harrington Manor. The atmosphere was thick with tension, secrets and unspoken truths swirling around them like the snowflakes outside. Clara's presence was a comfort, a reminder that amidst the chaos, there were still connections to be nurtured. Yet, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that the fragile web they had spun was on the brink of unraveling. In a quiet moment, Clara took Sophia's hands in hers, her expression earnest. She spoke of loyalty and love, of the bonds that tie families together, no matter the challenges they face. Her words resonated deeply with Sophia, who longed for acceptance and understanding. But as Clara continued, the shadows of doubt crept back in. She couldn't ignore the fact that Charles had been involved with Edward's ex-fiancée, a truth that lay heavy on her heart. The realization sent a chill down her spine, and she wondered if this revelation would change everything. As the storm raged outside, the Harrington family found themselves more isolated than ever. The walls that had once felt so grand now seemed to close in around them, the weight of their history pressing down on each member. Sophia stood at the crossroads, torn between the desire to embrace the love she felt for Edward and the fear that their connection would be thwarted by the past. The uncertainty lingered in the air, a reminder that the path forward was fraught with challenges. In that moment of introspection, Sophia resolved to confront her fears. She would not allow the shadows of the past to dictate her future. She would stand strong, regardless of the storms that raged both outside and within. As she returned to the drawing room, she could feel the weight of the family's expectation upon her shoulders, yet she also felt a flicker of determination ignited within her. If she was to forge a future with Edward, she would have to face the complexities of their situation head-on, willing to navigate the treacherous waters of love and family secrets. As she entered the room, the storm continued to howl outside, but Sophia felt a sense of clarity wash over her. The night was far from over, and the revelations that had surfaced were only the beginning. She would stand by Edward's side, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, for love, she realized, was worth fighting for. On Christmas morning, the world outside was blanketed in a thick layer of pristine snow, the air crisp and filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon wafting from the estate. The soft light of dawn filtered through the frosted windows of the grand Harrington home, casting delicate patterns on the polished hardwood floors. Sophia Hawthorne, still wrapped in her warm shawl, found herself wandering the corridors, the weight of the previous night's revelations heavy on her heart. She felt a mixture of apprehension and hope, her thoughts consumed by the burgeoning connection she had forged with Edward Harrington. As she descended the staircase, her footsteps echoed softly in the grand hall, where the towering Christmas tree stood resplendent, adorned with glimmering ornaments and twinkling lights. Sophia paused for a moment, her gaze drawn to the tree's splendor, a symbol of the happiness and tradition that enveloped the Harrington family. Yet, beneath the facade of joy, an undercurrent of tension lingered, fueled by the secrets that had surfaced during the storm. She ventured further, seeking refuge in the library, a cozy room filled with the scent of aged books and wood. It was here that she found Edward, seated by the fireplace, the flames dancing and casting flickering shadows on his contemplative face. He appeared lost in thought, a frown etched upon his brow as he stared into the fire, the glow illuminating his strong features. Sophia's heart fluttered at the sight of him, a mixture of admiration and concern washing over her. Approaching him cautiously, she felt an electric charge in the air, an unspoken understanding that had developed between them. Edward turned his gaze toward her, and for a moment, time stood still. The world outside faded, and all that mattered was the connection that had blossomed in the midst of their charade. Sophia could see the turmoil in his eyes, a reflection of her own inner conflict. Without a word, she settled beside him, the warmth from the fire wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. They sat in silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound breaking the stillness. It was a silence filled with unspoken words, emotions lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Sophia could feel the weight of their shared experiences pressing down upon them, and she knew that this moment was pivotal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Edward broke the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he spoke of his fears and doubts about the future. He confided in her the burden of living up to his family's expectations, the pressure of marrying someone deemed suitable by society. Each confession seemed to unravel the knots within Sophia's heart, revealing the raw vulnerability that lay beneath Edward's composed exterior. She, too, shared her dreams and aspirations, the longing for a life filled with purpose and love, not just the trappings of wealth and status. As they spoke, the walls that had separated their worlds began to dissolve, replaced by a profound understanding and acceptance of one another. They discovered that their fears, dreams, and desires intertwined in ways they had never imagined. In that intimate space, Sophia realized that their connection had transcended the initial pretense. It had transformed into something genuine and beautiful. The moment was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of a letter, delivered by a family friend who had braved the elements to reach them. The letter was addressed to Edward, and Sophia watched as he unfolded the paper, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. It was from his former fiancée, a woman he had thought was lost to him forever. The words on the page revealed that she had found happiness elsewhere, wishing him well and releasing him from the shackles of the past. A rush of emotion swept through Sophia as she observed Edward's reaction. Relief washed over his features, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. In that moment, she understood the significance of the letter. It was not merely a farewell to his past, but an opening to embrace the future. Edward's eyes met hers, an unspoken question lingering between them. Would he now have the courage to pursue his true desires, to fight for the love that had unexpectedly blossomed between them? As they sat together, the warmth of the fire mirrored the warmth growing in their hearts, igniting a flame of hope and possibility. Edward's expression shifted, determination replacing uncertainty. He reached for Sophia's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, a gesture that spoke volumes. Their connection deepened, and as they sat there, hand in hand, they both knew that they were on the precipice of something extraordinary. The ensuing moments felt pregnant with potential, a pause before the leap into the unknown. They exchanged glances, their eyes locking in a silent promise. It was then that Edward, with newfound resolve, stood up and pulled Sophia to her feet. The warmth of his hand in hers was electric, and she could feel the pulse of their shared energy thrumming between them. With the light of the fire illuminating their path, Edward led Sophia back to the grand hall, where the rest of the family had gathered. The atmosphere was charged, the hum of anticipation palpable as they entered the room. Edward's family, still recovering from the tumult of the previous night, looked up in surprise as he strode to the center of the room, Sophia at his side. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the stillness. His gaze swept across the faces of his family, searching for understanding and acceptance. In that moment, he realized that he had to be true to himself, true to the love he had discovered in Sophia. With a steady voice, he began to speak, his words flowing with sincerity and conviction. As he spoke, Sophia felt a rush of emotions swelling within her. The warmth of his words enveloped her like a soft embrace, filling her with a sense of belonging that she had longed for. Edward spoke of his feelings for her, the way she had changed his perspective on love and family. He declared his intentions, his desire to build a future together, free from the constraints of expectation. The room fell silent, the weight of his declaration hanging in the air. Sophia's heart raced as she sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Edward turned to her, his eyes shining with emotion. He knelt before her, the world around them fading into the background. In that moment, time stood still as he took a deep breath, his heart laid bare. "Will you marry me, Sophia?" he asked, his voice steady and filled with sincerity. Sophia's breath caught in her throat, the gravity of the moment overwhelming her. Tears of joy brimmed in her eyes as she nodded, unable to find her voice. The room erupted into a chorus of gasps and murmurs, but all she could focus on was Edward's unwavering gaze, the love radiating from him like a beacon. As she said yes, a wave of acceptance swept through the room. Edward's family, witnessing the genuine connection between them, began to embrace the unfolding reality. Charles, standing at the back, watched the scene unfold, a mix of emotions playing across his face. In that instant, he realized the depth of their bond and the misguided jealousy that had clouded his judgment. He stepped forward, offering a heartfelt apology, acknowledging the love that had blossomed before them. The atmosphere shifted from tension to celebration as the family rallied around the couple, welcoming Sophia into their midst. Laughter and joy filled the air, the spirit of Christmas enveloping them like a warm blanket. They were no longer bound by past expectations. Instead, they were united by love and the promise of a bright future. Sophia stood beside Edward, her heart swelling with gratitude and happiness. She had entered the Harrington home as a mere maid, but now she felt like an integral part of a family that had embraced her for who she was. The snow continued to fall outside, a gentle reminder of the beauty and magic of new beginnings. In that moment, surrounded by love and acceptance, Sophia knew that she had found her place, not just in Edward's heart, but in a family that would cherish her as their own.